Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, joined today not by Chris Bouquet, but I'm here with Sarah, Gregory, and Ashley Larisey. You guys, I'm so excited to have you here.
We're excited to be here.
Yes, we are.
So we were having a discussion offline, and I was like, we should probably just record this for the podcast because I feel like we were having a really awesome discussion. So I'm going to let you kick it off, Ashley. We were talking about life skills, and I know you work with older students, and so I'm sure this comes up a lot. And we were talking about the kind of the language that we use and sometimes the connotations that go around with that language. So I'm going to let you kind of take the lead here, and then we're all going to chime in and hopefully emulate the discussion that we were already having that was so awesome that we weren't recording, but we're going to record now.
All right. I am happy to do that. So I think that, we were just talking about this kind of term, life skills, and what does that really mean? I hear it all the time in working in high school, working in transition programs. I hear it from colleagues, that talking about their students, like they're in a life skills classroom or they have a life skills curriculum. And I just think, that term, I don't think it's well defined. I think that I don't have a clear picture in my head. Maybe some people do, but I don't. I don't have a clear picture in my head of what that means, what a life skills classroom looks like. And really thinking about, are the skills that we're targeting in a life skills classroom or in a life skills curriculum, are those really, universal life skills that every single child in that classroom needs to be working on? Thinking about things like making a bed, right? Like I don't make my bed.
But actually, that's a really important life skill that everyone needs to have.
I don't do it. I don't, right? But that's my choice, right? That's my choice that I have the autonomy and I have the agency to get to decide that that's something that I want to work on or that I don't want to work on. And so I don't know. It's something that's been on my mind. And I think it's something that probably applies to other areas of our field when we think about, words and, what the true definitions of those words really are. And, is that universally kind of understood amongst our colleagues?
I think one issue too with that is that a lot of times we say life skills and kind of mean that in opposition of sort of traditional academic things like reading, writing, and math. I actually just had a conversation with a colleague today about a student's placement. And right now they're in general education. And they said, well, I feel like the team is really thinking that this student needs more life skills. And so again, I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Because like you said, Ashley, there's not like a really clear definition or clear picture of that. And I was kind of got me thinking like, so are you saying he doesn't need the things that he's learning right now in gen ed? Because I would disagree with that.
I also think that it carries this heavy weight, kind of similar to what you're saying, Sarah, around, well, we've given up on academics, right? We've given up on all the things. And now we have to transition to this thing called life skills because, we've had no success with academics. And I think that that's where it becomes problematic, right? And that's where we kind of have this negative connotation that is spun with it, that is so loaded with information. But does it have to be, right? And can we use different language instead of relying on, again, this language that's heavy loaded? And I think, in a lot of ways problematic because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another term that really comes to mind, is these terms that, I don't hear as much anymore, thankfully, but these terms that, high functioning and low functioning, that doesn't do, and those terms are hurtful. They're not useful, but they also do nothing for me to tell me what do their skill sets look like? What are their support needs? Where do we need to kind of be focusing our energy and our time as far as supporting that learner? So that's just, again, these terms that we kind of throw around in our field sometimes that just they aren't clearly defined and just not helpful in helping us see the big picture.
And it is interesting how different people are going to have put different connotations to those things. Like even thinking about life skills, I'm thinking, well, we all need life skills. And like you said, Ashley, we're going to have different things that are important to us and that we want to learn how to do. But it's not like only disabled students need the all quote unquote life skills. And that some students need one type of skill and another set of students would need a different type of skill. Just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we all learn life skills, right? Like it just like feels very interesting that the, special needs community has adopted this idea of life skills and life skills classrooms and all of this, because it's such a general term that like is not, it's general in, when we're thinking about it, but again, it's like very specific because of all of the connotations that go alongside of it. So I think it's just, it's challenging and problematic. So then the question becomes, what do we do about it? Like, how do we use better language, or what, when we're going into that life skills classroom, or we're talking to a family about life skills, or what's happening in those classrooms and how we're supporting students, like, what does that conversation look like? How do we kind of change this?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's a really good question, because I think that, we could maybe use more specific language to talk about the things that we are working on. I think that could be one kind of push. I think another push could be to really kind of redefine what some of these terms mean. When I think this was something that I shared earlier when we were talking about this is, when I think about literacy, Karen Erickson, right? She says like literacy is a life skill. And when she talks about, literacy, she talks about it and she'll say, I use a very narrow definition of literacy. I'm talking about reading and writing using print or Braille. So, some people might say that they're quote unquote doing literacy in their classrooms. But again, that if it's not matching that narrow kind of definition and we're not really clear about what that means, maybe they aren't, doing authentic, meaningful, literacy instruction for students. So I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think?
I was just going to say that, Ashley, you've presented on this, and one thing you talked about was finding out what's important to an individual. And so if making the bed is really important to somebody, then like, sure, let's teach that skill. Let's communicate about it. And like the coffee cart might be really interesting and motivating to somebody, and it might be something that they see as a future career. So then like, yeah, let's go ahead and work on it. But some kids aren't really going to care about the coffee cart. And so, do we need to be pushing that just because we've determined we're tracking you for this life skills curriculum and deciding that you're not going to be learning sort of more stuff in the content areas?
Yeah. I think a lot of it, sorry, go ahead.
No. You go, Ashley.
I was just thinking a lot of that, like it's all in underneath this kind of umbrella of person-centered planning. And so when I think about that, I think about, okay, we have to think about what is important for the individuals, like, right, what skills do they need to be able to do these things as, in their adult life, and focusing really on this idea of like interdependence. It's not necessarily independence. It's they might be interdependent on a big group of people, as an adult, and that's okay. But are they able to kind of direct their care and talk about the things that they want that are important to them? But then also, not only are we thinking about what's important for them, but what's important to them. I think of it like as this balance, right? So we need to think about the things that, they need to be able to do, to be more successful, but then we can't forget about all the things that are important to them. And I think that's unfortunately what happens sometimes is, as educators, and I've definitely been guilty of it myself, that I spend way too much time thinking about the for and not as much time thinking about what's important to that person and how you can even, leverage those skills and work on them both at the same time.
I love that. I love that distinction. I think that's really important. And, I think that we lose track of that. I think that parents and families are oftentimes pushing for that for, right? Like, I need them to be safe and I need them to have all those things, which is definitely true. But especially when we're thinking about communication and that, development, we really have to focus on what's important to an individual. And I think that one of the amazing things that's come out of the neurodiversity affirming movement has been really focusing in on the things that are important to, neurodiverse individuals, as an example. And I think that, talking about specific curiosities and, making sure that we're supporting that, but also not intruding into that, is just kind of what's coming to mind right now. But I think that, at the end of the day, if we're trying to teach students how to communicate using AAC, we have to focus on what's important to them in order to get to, you know, the for them. Because ultimately, like it starts with intrinsic motivation. And I think that, you know, as much as we want to teach them all these things, it has to be intrinsically motivating in order for them to be successful in that. So I think it's a really great kind of way to frame it.
Yeah.
Another term that I think I've, you know, heard thrown around a lot is this idea of functional communication, which I think is, again, a little loaded with some negative connotations around it. And then it's also so broad, like, shouldn't all of our communication be functional at some level? Like, it's just like, it's one of those things that doesn't really make a lot of sense when you actually sit down and think about it. Life skills, functional communication. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, again, it's like another one of these terms that we use very commonly in our field, but we don't all have a shared definition of. And so I think sometimes functional communication might be used to sort of describe like a lower bar for our kids of like, if they can get their wants and needs met, but it might not, somebody might not use that to describe like really like generative, spontaneous, independent, unique language. So exactly like you said, Rachel, we all want to be functional communicators, and hopefully we are communicating these ideas in a functional way right now. But I think that that's a term that can sometimes have a negative connotation, maybe accidentally, because we don't have a shared definition.
And I think part of it is also like the idea that we've given up on, like, you know, any other type of communication that's beyond a basic function, right? Beyond just getting our basic wants and needs met. And I mean, I do think that's problematic, you know, thinking through that lens. And I think this kind of whole conversation, just if we zoom out for a second, like we're talking about kind of this language that we use and, you know, how it's weighted in all of these, you know, connotations around it. But at the end of the day, I feel like the problem with it isn't necessarily the language, but it's really just the weight underneath it, which is I'm giving up on, you know, academic skills. I'm giving up on, you know, more advanced language skills. And I think that that's where it's really challenging, you know, with these kind of umbrella terms that we hear thrown around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And exactly like Ashley said with life skills, like that doesn't tell me what's happening in a classroom. If you say I'm working on functional communication with a student, that actually doesn't tell me anything about what you're doing either. Like, what is what utterance length are you working on? What is the specific vocabulary? What pragmatic functions are you working on? So I think that, you know, there could be many different definitions for what functional means. And if all we're saying is functional, we're really not understanding what's happening or what's being targeted.
Yeah, I think being more specific to me, I think makes more sense, you know, and even being really specific with families and with teams, you know, and talking about maybe instead of saying things like, you know, we're working on functional communication, being really specific about the skills that we are working on, and then explaining why these are functional skills, right? It is functional for them to be working on these self-advocacy skills because, you know, we want them to be able to advocate for themselves effectively in a variety of different situations or whatever the skill is that we are working on. But, you know, those are truly functional skills. And I think that maybe if we frame it, you know, by being really clear and explicit with what we're working on and then making that connection, I think maybe that helps to clarify the definition for families and teams.
The other thing is, I feel like when I hear functional communication, I think of requesting. And that's all I think about. And so that's problematic, right? Like, we know that kids will learn how to request things, right? It's usually where they start learning how to communicate. And unfortunately, if we're only working on quote unquote functional communication, that might be where it ends. There's so many different other reasons and purposes for language that our kids never get exposed to. They never get modeling of how to comment and how to tell a joke and, you know, all the other reasons that we use language. And so I definitely have a negative connotation with the idea of functional communication, because I'm like, why are we working on that? Like, we need to be working on all the other things that kids don't get exposed to and they don't have opportunities to learn and practice.
Yeah, I think there's a lot behind that word functional, because I think, the three of us as SLPs, I think we're all thinking about functional communication, but I see all the time teachers talking about functional academics. And that to me is just there's a very interesting combination of terms, right? Like what is functional academics? What does that mean? What is the difference between, what is the opposite of functional academics? Is it non-functional academics? So just
good question. Ooh, these are all very good questions to ponder.
Yeah. Or is the opposite of functional communication non-functional communication? Because that is often not how people are using it, right? If a lot of people are saying functional communication to mean requesting, then is the opposite of that everything but requesting. It's confusing and poorly defined.
We don't have all the answers. We're here to help you think about these things. If you have an answer, you can always reach out to us at talkingwithtech@gmail.com. Thank you, ladies, so much for coming on to just chat this out. I felt like it was a great topic for the podcast, and it just so happens that Chris is out of town right now. So it was lovely having you ladies come on and share your ideas.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
Thank you guys so much. I'm super excited to share an interview I did with Nanny Aut. They shared about getting diagnosed as autistic later on in life. They have 2 children who are also autistic. So very excited to head into the interview I did with Nanny Aut.
If you enjoy Talking with Tech, we could use your help in spreading the word about the podcast. Please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes. The more positive reviews the podcast gets, the easier it becomes for others to find it. The more people who find the podcast, the more the word spreads about how to effectively consider and implement AAC. And who doesn't want that? If that sounds good to you, please take a moment and give the podcast a quick review. We'd so very much appreciate it. Now, let's get back into the episode.
Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, joined today by Nanny Aut. Nanny, I'm so excited to have you here.
Hi, pleased to be here.
So just start off by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a blogger for Autistic Village, where I explain how autistic brains work and how to work with autistic brains. I'm a parent of an amazing autistic adult. Some of my parenting was okay. Some of my parenting was good, and some of it was really bad. If we have conversations with my young adult, she will list you all of the bad things.
Yeah.
Some of the good too. But yeah, they never let me miss a single mistake.
Yeah, I think many parents would say something probably similar if they have a young adult. And it's just like we have to just kind of keep evolving and growing, right? And I think parenting
is... I was lucky because even as a child, they pulled me up every time. Mm-hmm. No, you don't do that. It's not okay to shout at me. Yeah. I won't accept that.
Yep. Okay. So Nanny, tell us a little bit about your autism diagnosis. I know that you got diagnosed as an adult, which I think is a really unique experience to share and talk about. And I know that, with social media being so accessible and people's voices being able to be heard, we're hearing from a lot of adults that they got diagnosed later in life. So I'd love for you to share your experience with that.
Yeah, I was identified when I was doing teacher training, and it was my mentor at the time who went, I think you may have autism. Mm. And I went, nope. I'm thinking Rain Man. I'm thinking Sheldon. And even though I had worked and got on really well with autistic students, the penny didn't drop. Mm. And I mean, even, it wasn't, but it was during the identification process, and we were talking about childhood, and they said, well, when did you start to speak? And I said, well, I was a really late speaker. I was about 4. I said nothing. I had one word until about 4, which was no. Everything was no. And, tested for hearing, and the doctors finally decided that I was mentally deficient. He said the responsiveness of a turnip.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
And put her in an institution and start your family again.
Wow. And what year was that approximately?
So that's in the early 70s.
Okay.
And my parents went, my child's not disabled, which not quite the right response, but a better response than okay, bye kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you win. And so, and then if you look back, there was, and I started talking about sort of things, and they said, what this, and they just said, how did nobody at any point in your life go, you're autistic? Well, I mean, they said, you have autism, and then they said, okay, we'll write you down as Asperger's, because England.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a while to come to terms with it, because it turned out that the university was not doing it for support, but to confirm their fears. And the only support they wanted to do was support me out the door.
Yikes. And this was the place that you worked?
This is where I was doing teacher training. I'd already taught for over a year. And because I'd done so well, we had the best results that class had for 10 years.
Wow.
And because of that, I was asked to do teacher training. And that's when it went all wrong. Because the people who ran the course said that autistics can't be teachers.
Wow. And so, I mean, of course, then the diagnosis felt like, well, it's affecting my livelihood too, like not being able to work.
And I said, I got the qualification, but the reference that they wrote ensured I could never get a post.
Wow. And so then tell me more. Tell me at this.
Well, I mean, I did manage to get somebody else to do a reference for me and get some teaching work, but I couldn't cope with the behaviorism in the schools. I couldn't cope with the fact that instead of understanding the children in your care, you're supposed to punish them for things they can't help.
Yeah, we're going to talk all about that in detail in a second.
And so that's when I thought, I can't stay in this system. I've got to go. And I had some illness at the time. Shortly after that, I had some illness that forced me onto the couch for over a year. And it gave me time to finally actually find out what being autistic might actually mean for me.
And what did you find?
And this is when I started finding out what other people's experiences were, and the penny started to drop about a lot of things like anxiety and depression that I'd had all my life that I didn't need to have.
Yeah.
That they were purely caused by me deliberately damaging my nervous system over and over and over again, trying to be something I wasn't.
Yeah. And like, I know that autistic adults talk a lot about masking and how challenging it is to kind of be in a society where you have to change the way that you are to kind of fit in. And then there's educators that are, trying to shift that too.
I mean, I was, I one of my careers was a dresser, and actors after 2 hours on stage come off absolutely soaked in sweat. They're exhausted. Make that 16 hours for autistics.
Yeah, exactly.
And and I hadn't heard the term chameleoning. I hadn't realized I was doing it. I hadn't realized that why my personality changed so strongly when I was too exhausted to mask. None of it. And it was just, how, and then I had to learn to be me, which took time. And But the funny thing was, when I was learning to be me and other people were earlier in the road than I was now, and I was saying, okay, this is what helped me. And they went, oh my goodness, that's really helped me too.
Mm.
And eventually someone said, you really should do a blog about this. And that's how come Autistic Village
Amazing.
happened.
Yeah. And I think it's such a great resource to have the ability to hear other people's perspectives that really you can identify with. And that sense of, oh my gosh, someone else is experiencing this too. Like, it's not just me. I think that oftentimes we feel like we're alone. And when we hear other people's experiences that we share, it just gives a sense of community and belonging that I think as human beings, we all need.
Oh, absolutely. And as autistics, we don't get.
Mm-hmm.
As most of our lives, we don't get that connection. We don't get to belong. We get to stand on the sidelines and just hope we don't make the mistake that gets us shoved out.
Mm. Yeah.
And so to find the autistic community where I fit was everything.
Mm. And how, what was the kind of transition? So it sounds like you had a diagnosis and then you were starting to kind of learn all about autism and identifying with people's experiences. And then you tried to kind of then share the knowledge, right? And pass it along. And that's how Autistic Village was kind of the genesis of that, right? Was that we should have this on the internet somewhere where it's widely accessible and people can find it from all over. And so what was that timeline? Like, how long did that kind of all take?
Well, basically I had a year where I wasn't able to be very physically active. Mm-hmm. And I am a trained researcher, doctorate. So I used my research techniques to figure it out because I wanted to find out whether it was you know how sometimes you grab at things because you want it to be true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I wanted to be sure what was me, what was autistic traits, what was myth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started doing research, and it took me about 4 years of research and doing the analysis and putting all of these autistic voices together to get the shape.
Wow. Yeah. Since we're kind of talking all about Autistic Village, I know that kind of expanded to include other autistic voices. So can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah. So, Autistic Village started because actually it was another autistic who wanted to do a blog, but didn't want to do the tech and didn't want to do and I said, well, I don't know if I can do it right enough or if I have anything interesting enough to say by myself, but you were a great writer. I'd love to have you. How about we work together? And so that's how we started out. And me and Nikki started off. And then Nikki was offered a great post doing something else. And, no time.
I know the feeling.
And we had the same, we had a few other people who joined and who came and left. Same thing that because I'm older, I'm less out of life, as it were. So life doesn't tend to pull me back out again. Mm-hmm. Whereas for other people, they've got a whole lot of other commitments. Mm-hmm. And to keep a blog going is a lot. It's a lot of time, a lot of commitment, a lot of work. And even with me not getting pulled away, there's still been quite a lot of radio silence for the last 2 years because it started doing well and I panicked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be overwhelming. I'm visible. Yeah. See me. I remember a similar experience when we started doing this podcast, which was over 5 years ago. No one really knew about it. And the moment it started, I started seeing people share episodes and seeing our download numbers. I was like, oh, wait, this is not just a me thing anymore. People are really having access to this. And it definitely puts an extra pressure on you to know that it's making an impact. And that feels really great at some level, but it also puts more pressure on building that content and making sure it's, resonating and all of those things. So I can totally relate to that.
And so, then I've sort of since then went on and got some coaching and realized that if I'm going to, you've got to have people. You need to have people to support you. You need to have people around you. You can't do it solo. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to have that, then I need to be earning, which is why we started up Inside Out, which is the training side of the program.
Yes.
And I mean, as a teacher, I got a salary. Mm-hmm. I got paid for my expertise. As a lecturer, I got paid as a salary. Yep. Everyone else, if you have expertise, you get paid for it. Why autistics feel that they shouldn't is we should never be made to feel that we shouldn't be asked. We should be giving away our knowledge for free.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you can't get paid, you can't do it. There's only a certain amount of time you can do something for free until then you can't do it anymore. And so you need to have some type of income so that you're able to do more of it, So, okay. So let's shift gears for a second. I think you're hearing about your experience is really super valuable to our listeners. And I'm really excited to have you on and hear all about it. I feel like we have a really great opportunity here to talk about, what types of advice and wisdom you would give to parents, especially. We have a lot of parents who listen to this podcast. We also have a lot of educators. But what would you say, when you're thinking about supporting autistic students, knowing all the experiences that you had, growing up and then, getting that diagnosis later, what best piece of advice would you give?
I think the best advice is listen to your child. Mm-hmm. When they say no, there's a reason. They may not know the reason because they're a child and they haven't spent years studying neuroscience.
Right.
They just know they have a bad feeling. And that bad feeling means no. Mm-hmm. And that bad feeling is a very good, strong signal that something is up, that something is damaging the nervous system. Mm-hmm. And if you listen to it and respect it, they will thrive. Mm-hmm. If you tell them to ignore it and it's not that bad and nobody else is having a problem, they will not thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's really good advice. And a lot of the students that educators who are listening to this podcast and also parents are non-speaking. And so I think it also extends to when a child is showing you that they don't want to do something and that they're not okay.
When they pull away, when they turn their head, and there is loads of non-speaking signals. Mm-hmm. One I loved was this in parent advice on AAC, and they said they're doing training. Mm-hmm. And my child keeps hitting purple, but there's no purple pieces in the puzzle. Why do they keep doing that? And I said, because "go away, you're annoying me" isn't on the AAC.
Because we haven't programmed that phrase in yet.
So she's deliberately picking the non-color over and over again. Mm-hmm. To tell you she is not interested. This is not a game she wants to play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And also, thinking about what you just said, we really need to prioritize self-advocacy with our students in general, but especially our AAC kids, because they rely on us to program the vocabulary and the phrases and all of those things and do the teaching that's necessary. So I've always been a big advocate for giving kids language to protest, no, stop, I don't like that, things like that, so they're able to advocate for what they need in whatever moment to be regulated.
Yeah, and to make sure that teachers don't take it away again. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you gaffer taped a speaking child's mouth, every authority would be on you.
Yeah.
So don't take an AAC child's words away. Mm-hmm.
Speaking on the subject of AAC, we've had a lot of autistic adults on this podcast who are part-time AAC users. So they talk about sometimes verbal speech is hard to access, or they just can communicate more clearly with AAC through typing and all these modalities. I'm curious what your experience has been.
I use an app called Emergency Chat. It's quite clunky, but it gives me, when I'm overwhelmed, my dyspraxia really kicks in, which means my motor planning is kaput. So being able to form words is off the table.
Yeah.
Typing is doable. It's a lot easier because it's one finger and my whole hand is moving basically. But it also means that when I type it, rather than them talking over me, they then have to read it. And then they have to respond. And that typing buys me the time to put my, I tend to think in shapes and pictures, so to translate it into words and communicate with it. But people sometimes do, and they, I've had a situation where someone did something very disrespectful and I was upset and I said it was not okay, so they took my phone away.
Oh my gosh.
And that was horrendous.
Yeah.
I lost my voice. And that's me as a highly educated, as me as a highly educated adult, but this nurse in hospital felt I was being disrespectful, so she taught me a lesson.
That's crazy.
And because I was on the bed in the hospital, I couldn't reach, she put it out of reach and I couldn't get it.
Man, that's really horrible to listen to.
And it didn't even occur to her what a terrible thing she'd done.
Yeah. And how often does that happen to our students, right?
And that's it with students, the iPad gets taken away. You can't regulate, so I'm going to take away your communication.
Right. Which is the one thing that students need in those moments, to be able to somehow communicate what is going on in their body and what we can do to help them.
Yeah. Not least know and go away.
Exactly. Yeah. Such good points. Oh, I love this. Tell me a little bit let's talk about behaviorism. We kind of referenced it in the beginning, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on it. And I know, it's controversial in a sense, but we're listening to a lot of autistic adults and they're sharing their experiences and their thoughts on it. So I'm really curious for you to share.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the frustrating things because it's everywhere. And so people normalize it. But when I grew up, people hit kids and it was normal. You weren't a good parent if you didn't hit your kid. I mean, and now we listen to that and think, what? Yeah. Are you serious? In what stage is assaulting a child?
Yeah, because that's exactly what it is.
And this is where we're at with behaviorism is because people were still not able to let go of the idea. You need that children, this is this sort of, apologies to any Christian listeners, but it is that Christian teaching that children are born bad and that you need to train them to be good. You must coerce them into being good. And people are still struggling to let go of that idea. Whereas actually research has shown children, it's basic survival instinct. If you hurt or upset the person who is protecting you, you are going to die on the mountain. They will leave you out there to die. It is bad survival. So children will do anything to get it right. If they're not getting it right, they don't know how.
Yeah. And I've worked with a lot of students who have severe anxiety about not getting it right, to the point where they just freeze. And then it's like, oh, well, they're not compliant. And I'm like, it's just like, it's crazy to hear things like that, because it's like we've created a system and a situation where there's a right and a wrong. And now we have building anxiety in our students who just want to do the right thing and they want to get it right, but they need help and support. And then, you know, when they don't do it and they freeze because of their nervous system, right? Then all of a sudden they're just not complying.
And it builds a bad thing. I mean, I had a good chat with one 16-year-old who couldn't stay in class. And he was known as a terror of the school. And I spoke to him and said, what's going on? First time anyone had actually asked that. Everyone had told him what he shouldn't be doing. No one had asked him why he was doing it. And he said, honestly, miss, I do it to amuse myself, because what's the point? Everyone knows I'm a failure. Everyone knows I'm a loser. I've got no chance anyway, so why shouldn't I just make myself happy?
Oh, that's so sad.
He said, these people are mean and they deserve everything they get.
Yikes. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's probably...
That's a lot of 16-year-olds out there who are doing that, and that's because of behaviorism. Because if they had said, when he was in primary, why are you struggling? How can we help you? How can we take down those barriers? He would be thriving. He would be interested in stuff. He would feel he had a future. I mean, 16 and no future. How is that? How are we allowing that to happen?
Yeah. And I'm thinking about, you know, students with complex communication needs, students who are non-speaking, they're even more vulnerable because they don't have the language skills yet to communicate those things. And so it's just this like really dangerous situation that we're in when, you know, we're not supporting students to be able to communicate what they need and how they feel and all those things. And then we're having communication be taught as a behavior, right? Which is just super problematic.
And, you know, in addition, if you are a praxic, your body quite often decides to do things you had no plan for. Somebody comes close to you, that hand will come flicking out. You didn't do any direction to that. You had no intention of, you know, you're just watching that hand go and going, you're doing what now? Or echolalia, where, you know, you do have some speech, but people assume that they have said a word and you repeated it back, that's confirmation. And it's just your brain doing a reflect.
I think we oftentimes see that with some of our students using AAC too, when they kind of hit the same button over and over again. I'm sure it's kind of no different than that echolalia and the
and it can be stims. And it can be stims. It sounds good. It can be the joy of finding the word. You know, I remember driving my parents absolutely crazy because I was an early reader, but I didn't realize that letters made words. I thought words were a whole block thing.
Yes. Oh, I'm so happy you shared that. I want to do a deep dive into that.
And so I was, you know, then I went to school and I found out they were actually made of letters. And I just kept playing this game. What does GTP spell? What does PTY spell? What does DOG spell? That spells dog. Oh my goodness, I have found a word.
Yeah.
And so for a week, I then asked, what does DOG spell? I knew what DOG spelled, but I was so excited. I had found this word and I had created this word and I wanted confirmation over and over and over again that I got this word.
Wow.
We just went on loop.
Yeah. I'm thinking about a specific student who has a very specific interest with ceiling fans. He loves ceiling fans. And every time I see him, he says, do you have a ceiling fan? He knows I have a ceiling fan, but he's so excited to talk about it. And I feel like it's like very similar, right? He's kind of on loop. And now I think it's been part of our it's part of our routine, right? Like, it's like, well, I see Rachel and then I ask her if she has a ceiling fan and she says,
and she tells me about the ceiling fan.
Exactly.
And I know this is a safe route of conversation, and I have my script and I'm safe.
Yeah.
And this is good.
Yeah.
She likes it. I like it. We're good.
I love that you mentioned I have a script and I'm safe, because I feel like oftentimes we don't think about that. We don't think about scripting as a child's safety in a communication interaction. And again, from listening to autistic adults, we know that conversation, because it can turn every which way, can feel very stressful at times, especially if you don't know, about a certain subject, or you have a preferred subject that you like talking about. And so I love that you said that script feels safe. Can you share a little bit about your own experience there with this idea of a script?
I spent a lot of time watching people and stuff, and I learned how people spoke, and I followed their conversations, and I learned how conversation worked. And I said, I think in shapes and patterns and things, which you can't communicate that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like describing to a blind person what the color blue looks like.
Yeah.
So I had to learn phrases that fit the shapes in my head. And I listened and I built the phrases, and I would try them out, and people would respond in the way I wanted them to respond, or they didn't.
Mm.
And if they responded right, then that script stayed. If they said, well, I don't get you, okay, rewrite that now. I need to rebuild that. I need to use new blocks to build the shape again for you. But also, I observed that, I made a slight mistake at school. When I went into school, small talk in my family was, they used to discuss a lot, there was quite a rough time in the 70s, and people discussed a lot of politics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came in with those scripts to school, and was asking other 6-year-olds who they thought should be the next prime minister.
Oh man,
it didn't go well.
What's a prime minister?
And I was completely lost, because I had no way of connecting or communicating with people, with my peers. I had no building blocks. They said, let's play with dolls, and I tried to take the doll apart, because that's what was interesting to me about a doll.
Right.
Yeah, you don't take other people's dolls apart. That's a bad thing to do.
I'm sure that's what you heard.
But no one explained this stuff to me. No one explained any of this. And so I learned to be the child in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And I would watch. I never interacted. I just watch, and I would watch, and I would learn, and I would watch, and I'd try and figure it all out.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was always told, yeah, you're not walking right. You're not talking right. Stop walking on your toes. Don't interrupt people. And I'm trying to think, well, how do I know when it's my turn? I've no idea. Whereas, of course, if you've got scripts, and there is a known back and forth, it's like the majority do it too. Hi, how are you doing? Fine. And you.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I know.
And you are already halfway down the corridor by the time you finish that script. Neither is looking at each other. Neither is actually interested. But that's social script that you do to keep safe and familiar. And so, yeah, I learned these scripts. I learned how to, the funniest was my scripts for identifying people, because I have face blindness. I can't, facial agnosia. I can't recognize people very well. If somebody has a really distinctive feature, I am so excited.
Yeah.
And so I learned to have this script for knowing people. So, hi, how's it going? And usually, you hope that they go beyond fine, but they probably won't. And then you go, how's the family? And hope they drop a name in.
Yeah. That's smart.
You know, oh, yes, Sarah's doing fantastic now. Yeah, Bob's in school now.
Giving context.
Great. Now I've got you. Now I know exactly who you are. If that didn't work, so how's work?
Yeah, some more clues.
So what's the new project you're working on?
Yeah.
Now they will tell me a bit about what they're doing in work. Now I've got a context again.
Wow.
And most of the time that works.
Yeah.
And, you know, then the name will drop into place and I'll know who they are. Sometimes it doesn't. The funniest was there's a guy called Ryan Tubridy who is very famous in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And my brain went, this person's familiar. You know this person. So we went through the whole script.
Yeah.
Now he meets millions of people. He obviously doesn't want to upset his fans by saying he doesn't know who they are.
Right.
So he is going through the same script too.
Wow.
And we sort of walk away, both still clueless about who the other person was.
Oh, man.
And my friend goes, oh my goodness, I didn't know you knew Ryan Tubridy. And I went, that'll be it, Ted.
Wow. This is so wild. I'm so excited that you're sharing this. And I'm having anxiety just listening to you talk about these experiences. Like, because we've all been in a situation where we're like, oh, who is this person? Like, I know I'm supposed to know them and know their name, but like, I can't quite pinpoint it. Like, that's anxiety producing for anyone.
I mean, my father's favorite, he has his own script in social situations.
Mm-hmm.
He will call my mom over.
Mm-hmm.
And go, hi, meet. And he will just pause. And that person will fill in the name.
It's genius. I love it. Wow. Smart.
But yeah, but again, same thing. He has the same facial agnosia. So he struggles. He said it was very embarrassing on the playground because he was sent to pick up kids. And he had to hope he picked the right one up.
Wow. That's crazy. We're talking about kind of conversational skills and social pragmatics and things like that. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about social skills, social pragmatics. You know, we're listening to autistic adults and thinking through a neurodiversity affirming lens, right? Like, how do we actually, as educators, teach autistic children without pushing them into masking and things like that?
I mean, for me, it's the guidebook.
Mm-hmm.
If I go to visit Japan, I will learn the basics of the language. I will learn their customs.
Mm-hmm.
I will learn how they work. And I will also apologize to them or explain to them when how I am is different to how they are.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's a little. I mean, for us, it's not so much that, but we shouldn't be. You know, as you know, we're not visitors.
Mm-hmm.
We should be part of the community. So it is more that this is how the majority work.
Mm-hmm.
So here are some pitfalls that you could accidentally walk into.
Mm-hmm.
It is well worth your time explaining to them that you're going to fall into it.
Mm.
So I now don't bother with eye contact, and I will tell people up front, I know you've been told that no eye contact means shifty and everything else, but actually I find it very overwhelming to do eye contact. So because I know and trust you, I'm not going to do that with you. Is that okay?
I love that. Just being really direct and honest and open.
And, you know, and again, you know, I can't queue up for conversations. So friends cue me now. I tell them I can't cue. And I said, if I don't know where the space is to be able to contribute, I will interrupt because I don't know where to go. Whereas if you go, hey, what's your thought? You give me that space to come in.
I love
you
that.
Don't leave me behind.
Wow. And I'm just thinking again, through a educator lens, like how can we help support our students with those peer relationships like that, to help them, in a way that's natural and not super intimidating.
And educators should be teaching the majority about autistic expression too.
Yeah.
And not in a autistics don't like eye contact. Because that's not true, and it's not right. There is times when I don't. There is time, if you want deep connection. But again, I find eye contact is a very deep, intimate connection. So only my very, very closest circle. I mean, if you grabbed a private part of me, that's eye contact for me.
Wow.
It's that level of assault.
Yeah.
And I am forced to submit to that level of assault with people I don't know, because that is the social expectation.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure that really resonates. I think that was a good metaphor because I feel like that's like really powerful.
And so, it's understanding that it is not a reasonable expectation. If somebody says, I don't want to do eye contact, it's not a reasonable expectation to insist on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think,
and so, and it's learning, so teachers teaching that if somebody says no, there's a reason. Respect it. If somebody gets something wrong, it's almost certainly not intentional. So take the time to explain what was wrong and why it upsets you.
What would you say when, we're working with students who don't have the language skills yet to kind of really clearly communicate?
Well, again, is to if you're not sure, ask a teacher. If you think someone's done something mean, talk to a teacher. And the teacher will be better able to interpret for you what's actually going on. Don't assume that somebody's mean.
Yeah. Yeah, because,
I think. I mean, one of the big ones that we had in school, is, especially in primary, I read it from parents all the time, is the person who wants to be a friend gets right into your space because closeness equals friendship. For an autistic, that is very, very invasive. And so very likely, even though they want to be your friend, they will push you away because they need to clear you a little bit further away for their personal comfort. And it's a lot quicker to do a quick push. And as you said, you don't have when you're younger, you don't have the words. You're too close, bye.
Right.
And they're not pushing you away as a friend. They need you to back up. Not go away, just give space.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you remember primary school being taught the bubble rule, where you have to hold your arms out and.
Yep.
Yeah, because that's developmentally, that's the developmental thing. Children need to learn that space. And but for autistics, that's a very threatening. It's not just uncomfortable, it's threatening. And so therefore you're going to get a much bigger response. And so teaching, teachers teaching that to do that and say, look, just respect space.
Right. Really priming students to understand that. And I think.
And teachers need to do their own education because most teachers do not understand how autistics work.
That is unfortunately very accurate too. And all educators, therapists, and even parents, don't really understand oftentimes. So yeah, I'm really excited to share this podcast episode because I think it's so insightful.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's why the behaviorism is such a problem with the cause. Because, behaviorism says we want to deal with the effect.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what they're saying is, I accidentally stand on your foot and your scream bothers me.
Mm.
So I'm going to teach you not to scream when I stand on your foot.
Which is impossible, seemingly.
And if it's more safe to not scream and endure the pain than it is to scream, then you'll learn not to scream. You will learn to suppress it. You will learn to keep it quiet. You'll learn to keep it inside.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas actually where they should be saying, why are they screaming? Oh, I'm stepping on their foot. I'll stop stepping on their foot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. This has been such a great interview, Nanny. I'm really excited to share it. I'm like smiling so big. Our listeners can't see my smile, but you've shared so many insights today. And I'm just, pumped to have everyone listen to your experience. For people who are interested in getting in touch, and I guess also, what's on the horizon for you next? Like you are obviously still a part of Autistic Village. Inside Aut is a course that you guys have to support parents.
The business is Inside Out.
Mm-hmm.
Basically it's what goes on inside our heads, and teaching parents about what goes on inside our heads.
Mm-hmm.
So the business is Inside Out, www.inside-out.com.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
And on the horizon, we're going to be doing a course which teaches how to spot where autistic stresses are. What are the autistic stresses? Sensory, processing, environment, energy, and past damage. If something bad has happened to you in the past, you're going to be extremely reactive about it in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of autistic students, unfortunately, have experienced a lot of trauma. And so that can trigger very easily when we have trauma as human beings. And really excited for you to share all of your insights with this course. We'll definitely link to all of those websites in the show notes. Thank you so much, Nanny, for coming on and sharing your experience. It was so powerful.
Yeah, thanks. I probably talked way too much. I do tend to.
No, we wanted you to talk a lot because it's so insightful to me. Like, I can't tell you how many moments during this interview I had this like aha moments, and I'm thinking about students that I'm working with. As much as I can learn and try to support my students, hearing your perspective and hearing how you share, through metaphor that really, can resonate with people, is so powerful. And so just like so many things that you shared today, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm thinking about specific students and circumstances. And I'm really excited as a therapist to be able to take everything I've learned from you. And I'm sure
and I mean, you get some funny ones. We had one teacher one TA who had her student loved her. And then all of a sudden hated her.
Yikes.
She changed her perfume. The only way this student recognized her was from her original body wash.
Wow. That's wild.
And so when she changed it, and it was a much more pungent one, so he found it anxiety inducing as well. Mm-hmm. And I just said, have you changed anything like scent or things? She said, well, I've changed my body wash. I said, change it back and see how it goes. And she posted back and she says, I had no idea why that worked. And I said, do you want to know?
Yeah. Wow. And I think this is a perfect story because so often we have to just go the extra step and do the detective work to figure out what's going on. And I think this is a perfect example of that. Like something as subtle as changing your body wash can be really with sensory systems that are hard to integrate and either understimulated or overstimulated, depending on the circumstances. It's just like these things really do make a huge difference.
Oh, no, I mean, this is it. I mean, the spiky confuses people because people say, well, either they must be if they're sensory seeking, they must be sensory seeking. And they forget that we are sensory seeking and sensory avoidant.
Yeah.
And where those spikes are is different for everyone. And also, the more stressed we are, the higher those spikes go. So the child who has low interoception but can just about pick up they need to go to the loo, but is in a stressful situation, they're going to have an accident because they've lost the signal.
Yeah.
It is distress, but it's not caused by distress. It's caused because their sensory is now dropped beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating. I was going to share that we had Chloe Rothschild. She's an autistic adult who was just on the podcast, part-time AAC user, so uses AAC part-time, and talks all about interoception and how her AAC system actually helped her really explore her body and understand what was going on in it, and then attach that to language. And so I think it's just another good reminder of that is a challenge for autistic individuals, and really, supporting that through, technology can be helpful.
As a kid, you don't know any of this. So when you know that this sound, you hear the sound of the motor and it is driving you absolutely crazy. And they say, what motor?
Right.
And you start trying to tell yourself, obviously, I didn't hear it. There is no motor. So I'm imagining this. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. And you start, well, okay, I can't trust my own senses.
Yeah.
My senses are lying to me.
What a scary experience. It's almost like you're like, I think we've all kind of had an experience where like, am I going crazy here? Like, what's going on here? And if that's like your constant experience, then I'm sure that's really overwhelming.
Yeah, and all parents need to go is, okay, it's too hot for you.
Yeah, exactly. Seems so simple.
It's not too hot for me, but it's too hot for you.
Yeah, seems so simple, Nanny. Why can't we all get it right?
But it's all the time. I mean, I learned it because my young adult corrected me. It was one of those situations, and I said, put your jacket on, it's cold. And she goes, no, it's cold for you. It's not cold for me.
So subtle, but so important, right? It's like, and I think that that's oftentimes what happens with adults and children, right? Like we just assume, and we're like in like caregiver mode, and probably that's how we were parented, so it's just like being passed down. And then they were exceptional on why as well. So, and it taught me so much because I go, you have to get dressed to go to the supermarket. Why? Well, actually, that other than not naked, there is no reason you can't wear your pajamas to the supermarket. You're not wrong.
So if you're comfortable in pajamas, fine. And it means we don't have to fight to get to the supermarket. Pajamas it is.
Sometimes I wear pajamas places too. I think we've all been there, like running out.
But yeah, they taught me so much like that because I had all these rules. I had all these how to be a good parent, which was completely wrong.
Oh, I love it.
And each time they just went, nope. Even at 2, they just go, nope. And if I push, they go, why?
Yeah.
And, my parents go, they won't understand. You don't waste your time. They're just playing with you. They're messing with you. if I explained and it made sense, then they'd agree. If it didn't make sense, then they wouldn't.
Simple as that.
It's you learn.
Yeah. It sounds like that has been a really awesome learning experience for you.
And the funny thing is that it turns out it wasn't till they went away to college that they ceased to have an environment that was set up for them.
So they got to
they had to live in a neurotypical environment and not an autistic environment that they'd had set up the way that they liked. And they struggled. And that was when the penny dropped that they were autistic, because up to that point there was no, there was no trauma, there was no distress. So we didn't know.
Yeah. Wow. It's super interesting.
And they had to learn to look after. I was newly diagnosed, and so I was like, everything I learned, I taught them how to look after their nervous system too, and how to advocate and how to say, okay, no. My body clock isn't 9 a.m. I will be here at 11 because otherwise I will struggle. I will stay till 7, but I need that time. If you're giving me instructions, there needs to be a written format. I have a red Post-it. If the red Post-it is on my computer, don't talk to me.
Oh, I like that one. I need that one.
Because if you do, I will have to start what I'm doing again, and that's very frustrating for both of us. And I won't be able to pay attention to what you're saying because I'm going to be trying to get back to what I'm doing.
I feel like it's a great lesson in just setting boundaries that work for us as humans, And
that's it. And to know you have the right to do it. And this is what we have to teach our children, that they have the right to set boundaries.
Nanny, I feel like I could talk to you all day. Like, you're such a source of wisdom. But I want to respect your time. And also, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this insight. I'm really, really grateful for you taking the time to talk to all of us. And I'm really excited to share this episode.
Yeah.
So for Talking with Tech, I'm Rachel Madel, joined by Nanny Aut. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week.